These Small Hours with Russell Cordell Staker. A very pleasant good evening, my friends. Welcome back. I'm Russell Cordell Staker. You are listening to These Small Hours podcast. It is the evening of Wednesday, 13 July 2022 in Austin, Texas. And as usual, I'm sending out some goodness your way. I hope that when this finds you, it finds you well, and that you're keeping cool. I am already hoping for and anticipating the fall, and very much looking forward to October in particular. I love Halloween. I love everything about the kickoff to the fall season, and I do tend to find, I'm not trying to wish away my time, and I certainly am not advocating you do the same, that when it's really hot in the middle of the summer, certainly in Texas, it's all too easy to want to wish for different cooler times and temperatures, although in Texas it stays hot in October as well. But I think the psychology of knowing that it's the fall and that I'm getting nearer to those cooler temperatures certainly adds to the hope and the refreshment, and as well as the ambiance of the moment. Tonight, we're going to read the final portion of Walt Whitman's original 1855 Leaves of Grass. This is the sixth portion, and then this project will come to a conclusion with the following podcast, which is going to pull all of the six together, as well as my prelude or the trailer. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming probably in the next couple of weeks as I anticipate it. And as I've mentioned a few times, and I'm alluding to that, and then this podcast is going to take on a brand new foray into some new experiences and some readings and things that are coming, as well as some writings of my own. This evening, before I get started on reading this last little portion, which is a short little bit, and then have some thoughts on the flip side of that, I wanted to point you to something to keep in mind just before I begin reading. Walt Whitman, throughout this reading, if I were to summarize one of the many things that I think he attempts to do and does very, very well, and again, this is my perspective. I am not a scholar. I have not spent an inordinate amount of time studying Walt Whitman. I am simply a reader. I'm a man of letters in my own space and time. I've been reading fervently and omnivorously and voraciously since I was just a boy. And Whitman has been a big part of probably the last 25, 30 years of my life at various points and in tiny little sparse moments. So please take this with that perspective. I am not a scholar, and I'm not trying to be somebody that is well versed in Whitman. But I will say this in terms of the human aspect of being a reader, and this is me giving my own perspective on this, and also as an aspiring and growing writer myself. And actually, I should stop saying that. I am a writer, and I've been writing, and I have a book that I've put out there. Whether it gets published or not doesn't matter, and I'm working on another one right now. I'm writing essays, so I am a writer. But all of that gives me at least a sense of being the kind of reader that I think a writer would want to have in his or her stable. And so that's what I wanted to come to this, in that throughout this process, I've been offering my perspective, not in a scholarly way, but in what I would call a very human way, and based on my understanding of the reading. For me, Whitman, one of the things that he does very, very well throughout his just magnificent writing of the Leaves of Grass is he offers what I describe as a wider angle to life. And that's what I want to position this final portion with tonight before I start reading it. I'm going to give you some thoughts here that I want you to put in the back of your mind and deep down in your heart as you listen to these final words that will hopefully allow you to listen a little closer. This wider angle is something that isn't just as it sounds. Of course, what is a wide angle? It's a panoramic view of a particular place where you may be standing. It could be a moment in time, but it's not a narrow view. It's a wide, broad, and all-inclusive view. And that's what Whitman is doing with this writing. And I was thinking about, what does it mean for me when I have a wide-angle view of anything? What would that actually mean? And if I were to give it a definition, I can't really give it I could give it the direct definition of what a wide angle would be if I was a director with a camera. I'm not interested in that. But I think my explanation would be around a sense of feeling. And for me, it's the reverse of fear. And just the other day, I was thinking about the reverse of fear with this wide angle as I was rereading this last portion of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And the word reverse, and thinking of fear, even though I'm gonna pull something here that I don't know where this comes from. I've described this before. I get into a state of what I would call ratatouille, where I take almost disparate things and ideas and I blend them together, and all of a sudden they give me something that goes, oh, that makes better sense. And so this reverse of fear got me thinking about the song by Depeche Mode on their magnificent 1990 album, Violator, the song Halo. And there's a particular lyric, you wear guilt like shackles on your feet, like a halo in reverse. And that reverse word is what stuck in my mind as I was hearing that lyric. You wear guilt like shackles on your feet, like a halo in reverse. And the reverse here in the terms of Whitman is the reverse of fear. When I see what he's portraying, it broadens my view, and fear of whatever is on my mind, worry, doubt, misunderstanding, certainly a lack of complete comprehension of this entire mortal frame that I'm in, that we all struggle with, some of us more so than others. All of a sudden, those moments of misunderstanding or incomprehension, if that's possible, of not really having this full grasp, and it's a feeling of not having control. And that's something that I think in a godlike way, I think we're encouraged in this life to let go of. We as humans want to control. We want to be right. We want to understand everything from A plus B equals C. We want to know the whole spectrum of the experience, have a very clean answer to it, take away the disarray, the chaos, the messiness, because we are afraid to face the fact that the reality is that there is no control. And what Whitman is suggesting with this wider angle is to reverse that. And in reversing it by looking at a wide angle, we reverse the fear like a halo in reverse. In this particular portion, you're going to hear a phrase where he talks about your flowing character. And this got me thinking about something. It was a reminder of the fluid hours of my life, of our lives. And as I'm speaking to you, I really am collaborating with you, believe it or not. So wherever you may be, you could be sitting in your car, you could be sitting at the office, maybe you're supposed to be doing your work, and I'm delighted you're listening to these small hours right now. You could be at home, it doesn't matter. But if you are listening right now, it's as if I've got my arm around you, and we are exchanging a sense of this flowing character, which is a reminder of the fluid hours of our lives right now. And Whitman tells us, and that I remind you, Walt is humanity's great reminder, and he's going to remind us of some things here right at the conclusion of this just magnificent poem that he's written, that we evolve. We are evolving now, but we can still see the parts of who we, all of us, once were, in glimpses and shadows and bursts of light and sounds, the feelings in our body when the body was younger and moved more perfect, or that we thought it could ever be that it was as perfect as it might be, and yet we didn't understand what our body really was about. And maybe as we start to lose some of the accoutrement or the acumen or the agility of what our body was when we were younger, as we get older, some of us get better as we get older, some of us get less so. But the perspective, the depth, the range, the viewpoint, the feeling, all of these things as we evolve help us to be more refined and hopefully more perceptive and receptive of the kinds of inputs that are coming into our lives at various points. And I should say that it's not various points in the sense that we're in this fixed position and it's almost like we're a target where these little stimuli come in. It could be an instant somebody says something, or maybe it's an observation we make. It's that we're aware of the broader, wider angle, and that if we're more aware of the angle in which we are a part of, rather than being the center point of, that we might be more apt to understand that our job here, if there is a job or task, is to be less afraid and more observant, more quiet, more aware of what's around us, because what's developing underneath in this moment, the moments that we'll remember later, the moments that we project forward and wonder about in the future, is our flowing character. I want to share just a brief something that I was thinking about when this this thought that I'm having that I'm trying to explain to you or share with you in this moment came out. My flowing character is encapsulated in a memory of a particular motion of just a really short-term little snap glimpse aspect of something that I just thought about the other day. And it's a feeling that I have of being very aware of a particular moment. I would have been maybe 17. Actually, this ranges anywhere from the age of 12 all the way up until I was 18, because I in one of the many jobs that I did, and this was a little business that I started on my own, was I started mowing lawns in my neighborhood in Cherry Creek area that I grew up in off Orchard Road. We lived off Lima Way. And this motion, this instant, this flowing character that came back to me that encapsulates so much of who I am. And I'm not going to define all of it. I'm just going to share with you what this memory is for me without having to bore you with all the detail, is simply of me looking at myself now. I'm 48 now. I'm looking all the way back at that particular time. This was in the mid to late 80s now that I'm thinking about. So anywhere from the years of 1986 up into about 1990, 91. But it's this instant of me walking down Orchard Street towards my house. And I'm a tall kid, and it's hot. It's summertime. Right about the same time right now, mid-July. I've just gotten done mowing 3 or 4 yards just up the hill from where the house is, and I'm wearing a sweat-stained pink golf ball cap that I wore every time I mowed the lawn. I wore that hat religiously for 2 full summers. I wish I still had that hat until, I'm sure maybe my dad pitched it, although he did tell me one time, he said, "Russell, you should get that hat bronzed," because it was so salted and besweated. It was just nasty. I remember when I put it on, I almost felt like a helmet because it had been in the sun and it gathered so much of my head sweat. But I'm wearing this ball cap, and I'm pushing my Honda lawnmower with my Honda weed whacker resting horizontal on the accelerator and handle of the grip bar of that push lawnmower. It had its own little accelerant, but it was a push lawnmower, and I'm going down the hill. And I'm heading home because I've done my job. And I can hear in my head, just as I was hearing it then, listening to it on my Walkman. I liked Bob Seger. I listened to a bunch of groups, but Bob Seger, Like a Rock. I was 18, didn't have a care, working for peanuts, not a dime to spare. But I was leaning solid everywhere, like a rock. I was something to see. And that's the moment for me. If I were to say, what's the Russell Cordell Staker moment for myself in which I feel like there's a conduit of my own flowing character of who I was and what was in front of me and the kind of work and effort that I was going to put into the kind of life I was going to have, I think that captures it. And I want you to think about some of your own instances that can come out. And it may take you a little while. I wasn't really searching for that. That one just popped into my head while I was thinking about it. But this is also what I want you to consider before we read this 6th portion, is what is the wider angle of the flowing character of your own life if you were to go back to a particular moment that essentially grasps who you were in that time, but also hints at maybe where you're going in the future. It doesn't even have to be defined or something that you could explain, because I'm not going to explain to you why I just shared with you that particular thing, but it says so much about who I am. As I get ready to read this, there are a couple of other things that I want you to consider. That we keep moving forward, we keep evolving. This flowing character in time is an impetus. It's something that encourages us to stay curious about what's just up ahead, even as we're curious about what we're leaving behind. That the moment that we're in now, and now I'm talking about right this present moment, wherever you're at in your life, is going to be just as poignant as any that you may have hearkened back to, as I just described, this one that I have of myself. Whitman keeps reminding us to keep a wide angle and a weather eye, a curiosity in this space where so little is really ours to keep, much less really truly understand at a point of certainty. And then this led me to another thought that I had, and this was a question that kept coming up over and over and over in my mind. And I don't know why I was thinking about this question. In fact, I wasn't asking this question of myself in response to any stimuli at all, but this was the question, and it kept coming up in various forms, but in essence, what the question was that I kept asking myself in a rhetorical way was, why do we have to be so right when we'd be much better off admitting we've all been so terribly wrong? And it kept coming back to me. And I'm like, why am I asking myself this question? Maybe this is entirely a question that's beside the point, save for a willingness to admit that my narrow view of things nearly blinds me to the wider angle that Whitman is pointing to, the angle that the universe he's pointing me to, or towards, has to offer and is available if I'll just allow myself to stop trying to be so right about something, or to try to sense that I'm controlling some understanding about this life, that really it's a moment. And my job, or my hope right now, is to just take that wider angle. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to go get a cold drink or something to sit back and be comfortable, because we're now going to read the sixth and final portion of Walt Whitman's 1855 original version of The Leaves of Grass. And on the flip side, I have a thought that I'd like to share with you as I wrap this up. So dial in here and enjoy these words. Pay close attention. You'll have to forgive me just before I go into the little intro music piece before I start reading. This is a pre-postscript, and it's one further thought that I want to just leave with you. Whitman, there's a particular line in a film that I'm going to share with you on the back end of this after I've read it. And the line simply is this, and I'll explain it after we've read this and we get to the other side of this, that if I should fall, remember what you see here. So keep that in mind. If I should fall, remember what you see here. So with that, let's go ahead and lead into Walt Whitman's, the final portion of the 1855 Leaves of Grass. A young man came to me with a message from his brother. How should the young man know the weather and when of his brother? Tell him to send me the signs. And I stood before the young man face to face, and took his right hand in my left hand, and his left hand in my right hand. And I answered for his brother and for men, and I answered for the poet, and sent these signs. Him all wait for, him all yield up to, his word is decisive and final. Him they accept, in him lave, in him perceive themselves as amid light. Him they immerse, and he immerses them. Beautiful women, the haughtiest nations, laws, the landscape, people and animals, the profound earth and its attributes, and the unquiet ocean. All enjoyments and properties and money and whatever money will buy. The best farms, others toiling and planting, and he unavoidably reaps the noblest and costliest cities, others grading and building, and he domiciles there. Nothing for anyone but what is for him. Near and far are for him. The ships in the offing, the perpetual shows and marches on land are for him if they are for anybody. He puts things in their attitudes. He puts today out of himself with plasticity and love. He places his own city, times, reminiscences, parents, brothers, ancestors, associations, employment, and politics, so that the rest never shame them afterward nor assume to command them. He is the answerer. What can be answered, he answers, and what cannot be answered, he shows how it cannot be answered. A man is a summons and challenge. It is vain to skulk. Do you hear that mocking and laughter? Do you hear the ironical echoes? Books, friendships, philosophers, priests, action, pleasure, pride, beat up and down, seeking to give satisfaction. He indicates the satisfaction and indicates them that beat up and down also. Whichever the sex, whatever the season or place, he may go freshly and gently and safely by day or by night. He has the passkey of hearts, to him the response of the prying of hands on the knobs. His welcome is universal. The flow of beauty is not more welcome or universal than he is. The person he favors by day or sleeps with at night is blessed. Every existence has its idiom. Everything has an idiom and tongue. He resolves all tongues into his own and bestows it upon men. And any man translates. And any man translates himself also. One part does not counteract another part. He is the joiner. He sees how they join. He says indifferently and alike, "How are you, friend?" to the president at his levee. And he says, "Good day, my brother," to Cudge the hose in the sugar field. And both understand him and know that his speech is right. He walks with perfect ease in the Capitol. He walks among the Congress. And one representative says to another, "Here is our equal appearing and new." Then the mechanics take him for a mechanic, and the soldiers suppose him to be a captain, and the sailors that he has followed the sea. And the authors take him for an author, and the artists for an artist. And the laborers perceive he could labor with them and love them. No matter what the work is, that he is one to follow it or has followed it. No matter what the nation, that he might find his brothers and sisters there. The English believe he comes of their English stock. A Jew to the Jew he seems, a Russ to the Russ. Usual and near, removed from none. Whoever he looks at in the traveler's coffee house claims him. The Italian or Frenchman is sure, and the German is sure, and the Spaniard is sure, and the island Cuban is sure. The engineer, the deckhand on the Great Lakes or on the Mississippi or St. Lawrence or Sacramento or Hudson or Delaware claims him. The gentleman of perfect blood acknowledges his perfect blood. The insulter, the prostitute, the angry person, the beggar see themselves in the ways of him. He strangely transmutes them. They are not vile anymore. They hardly know themselves. They are so grown. You think it would be good to be the writer of melodious verses. Well, it would be good to be the writer of melodious verses. But what are verses beyond the flowing character you could have? Or beyond beautiful manners and behavior? Or beyond one manly or affectionate deed of an apprentice boy or old woman? Or man that has been in prison or is likely to be in prison? Suddenly out of its stale and drowsy lair, the lair of slaves, like lightning Europe, leapt forth, half startled at itself, its feet upon the ashes and the rags, its hands tight to the throats of the kings, or of kings. O hope and faith, O aching close of lives. O many a sickened heart, turn back unto this day and make yourselves afresh. And you, paid to defile the people, you liars mark, not for numberless agonies, murders, lusts, for court thieving in its manifold mean forms, worming from his simplicity the poor man's wages. For many a promise sworn by royal lips and broken and laughed at in the breaking. Then in their power, not for all these did the blows strike of personal revenge or the heads of the nobles fall. The people scorned the ferocity of kings. But the sweetness of mercy brewed bitter destruction, and the frightened rulers come back. Each comes in state with his train, hangman, priest, and tax gatherer, soldier, lawyer, jailer, and sycophant. Yet behind all, lo, a shape, vague as the night, draped interminably, head, front, and form in scarlet folds, whose face and eyes none may see. Out of its robes only this, the red robes lifted by the arm. One finger pointed high over the top like the head of a snake appears. Meanwhile, corpses lie in new-made graves, bloody corpses of young men. The rope of the gibbet hangs heavily, the bullets of princes are flying, the creatures of power laugh aloud, and all these things bear fruits, and they are good. Those corpses of young men, those martyrs that hang from the gibbets, those hearts pierced by the gray lead, cold and motionless as they seem, live elsewhere with unslaughtered vitality. They live in other young men, O kings. They live in brothers, again ready to defy you. They were purified by death. They were taught and exalted. Not a grave of the murdered for freedom, but grows seed for freedom, in its turn to bear seed, which the winds carry afar and resow, and the rains and the snows nourish. Not a disembodied spirit can the weapons of tyrants let loose, but it stalks invisibly over the earth, whispering, counseling, cautioning. Liberty, let others despair of you. I never despair of you. Is the house shut? Is the master away? Nevertheless, be ready. Be not weary of watching. He will soon return. His messengers come anon. Clear the way here, Jonathan. Way for the president's marshal. Way for the government cannon. Way for the federal foot and dragoons and the phantoms afterward. I rose this morning early to get betimes in Boston town. Here's a good place at the corner. I must stand and see the show. I love to look on the stars and stripes. I hope the fifes will play Yankee Doodle. How bright shine the foremost with cutlasses. Every man holds his revolver, marching stiff through Boston town. A fog follows. Antiques of the same come limping. Some appear wooden-legged, and some appear bandaged and bloodless. Why, this is a show. It is called the dead out of the earth. The old graveyards of the hills have hurried to see. Uncountable phantoms gather by flank and rear of it. Cocked hats of mothy mold and crutches made of mist, arms and slings and old men leaning on young men's shoulders. What troubles you, Yankee phantoms? What is all this chattering of bare gums? Does the ague convulse your limbs? Do you mistake your crutches for firelocks and level them? If you blind your eyes with tears, you will not see the president's marshal. If you groan such groans, you might balk the government cannon. For shame, old maniacs, bring down those tossed arms and let your white hair be. Here gape your smart grandsons, their wives gaze at them from the windows, see how well dressed, see how orderly they conduct themselves. Worse and worse. Can't you stand it? Are you retreating? Is this hour with the living too dead for you? Retreat then, pell-mell, back to the hills, old limpers. I do not think you belong here anyhow. But there is one thing that belongs here. Shall I tell you what it is, gentlemen of Boston? I will whisper it to the mayor. He shall send a committee to England. They shall get a grant from the Parliament and go with a cart to the royal vault. Dig out King George's coffin, unwrap him quick from the grave clothes, box up his bones for a journey, find a swift Yankee clipper. Here is freight for you, black-bellied clipper. Up with your anchor, shake out your sails, steer straight toward Boston Bay. Now call the president's marshal again and bring out the government cannon and fetch home the roarers from Congress and make another procession and guard it with foot and dragoons. Here is a centerpiece for them. Look, all orderly citizens, look from the windows, women. The committee open the box and set up the regal ribs and glue those that will not stay and clap the skull on top of the ribs and clap a crown on top of the skull. You have got your revenge, old buster. The crown has come to its own and more than its own. Stick your hands in your pockets, Jonathan. You are a made man from this day. You are mighty cute. And here is one of your bargains. There was a child went forth every day. And the first object he looked upon and received with wonder or pity or love or dread, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day or a certain part of the day, or for many years or stretching cycles of years. The early lilacs became part of this child, and grass, and white and red morning glories, and white and red clover, and the song of the phoebe bird, and the March-born lambs, and the sow pink faint litter, and the mare's foal, and the cow's calf, and the noisy brood of the barnyard, or by the mire of the pond side, and the fish suspending themselves so curiously below there, and the beautiful, curious liquid, and the water plants with their graceful flat heads, all became part of him. And the field sprouts of April and May became part of him, wintergrain sprouts, and those of the light yellow corn, and of the esculent roots of the garden, and the apple trees covered with blossoms and the fruit afterward, and woodberries, and the commonest weeds by the road, and the old drunkard staggering home from the outhouse of the tavern whence he had lately risen, and the schoolmistress that passed on her way to the school, and the friendly boys that passed, and the quarrelsome boys, and the tidy and fresh-cheeked girls, and the barefoot Negro boy and girl, and all the changes of city and country wherever he went. His own parents, he that had propelled the father stuff at night and fathered him, and she that convinced him in her womb and birthed him, they gave this child more of themselves than that. They gave him afterward every day. They and of them became part of him. The mother at home quietly placing the dishes on the supper table, the mother with mild words, clean her cap and gown, a wholesome odor falling off her person and clothes as she walks by. The father, strong, self-sufficient, manly, mean, angered, unjust. The blow, the quick, loud word, the tight bargain, the crafty lure. The family usages, the language, the company, the furniture, the yearning and swelling heart. Affection that will not be gainsayed, the sense of what is real, the thought of it after all it should prove unreal. The doubts of daytime and the doubts of nighttime, the curious whether and how. Whether that which appears so is so, or is it all flashes and specks? Men and women crowding fast in the streets, if they are not flashes and specks, what are they? The streets themselves and the facades of houses, the goods in the windows, vehicles, teams, the tiered wharves, and the huge crossing at the ferries. The village on the highland seen from afar at sunset, the river between shadows. Aureola and mist, light falling on roofs and gables of white or brown 3 miles off. The schooner nearby sleepily drooping or dropping down the tide. The little boat slack-towed astern. The hurrying, tumbling waves and quick broken crests and slapping the strata of colored clouds. The long bar of maroon tint away solitary by itself. The spread of purity it lies motionless in. The horizon's edge, the flying sea crow, the fragrance of the salt marsh and shore mud. These became part of the child who went forth every day and who now goes and will always go forth every day. And these become of him or her that peruses them. Now, who learns my lesson complete? Boss and journeyman and apprentice? Churchman and atheist? The stupid and the wise thinker, parents and offspring, merchant and clerk and porter and customer, editor, author, artist, and schoolboy? Draw nigh and commence. It is no lesson, it lets down the bars to a good lesson, and that to another, and every one to another still. The great laws taken effuse without argument. I am of the same style, for I am their friend. I love them quits and quits, I do not halt and make salams. I lie abstracted and hear beautiful tales of things and the reasons of things. They are so beautiful, I nudge myself to listen. I cannot say to any person what I hear. I cannot say it to myself. It is very wonderful. It is no little matter, this round and delicious globe, moving so exactly in its orbit forever and ever, without one jolt or the untruth of a single second. I do not think it was made in 6 days, nor in 10,000 years, nor 10 decillions of years, nor planned and built one thing after another as an architect plans and builds a house. I do not think 70 years is the time of a man or woman, nor that 70 millions of years is the time of a man or woman, nor that years will ever stop the existence of me or anyone else. It is wonderful that I should be immortal, as everyone is immortal. I know it is wonderful, but my eyesight is equally wonderful, and how I was conceived in my mother's womb is equally wonderful, and how I was not palpable once, but am now, and was born on the last day of May, 1819, and passed from a babe in the creeping trance of 3 summers and 3 winters to articulate and walk. All are equally wonderful. And that I grew 6 feet high, and that I have become a man 36 years old in 1855, and that I am here anyhow, are all equally wonderful. And that my soul embraces you this hour, and we affect each other without ever seeing each other, and never perhaps to see each other is every bit as wonderful. And that I can think such thoughts as these is just as wonderful. And that I can remind you, and you think them and know them to be true, is just as wonderful. And that the moon spins round the earth and on with the earth is equally wonderful. And that they balance themselves with the sun and stars is equally wonderful. Come, I should like to hear you tell me what there is in yourself that is not just as wonderful. And I should like to hear the name of anything between Sunday morning and Saturday night that is not just as wonderful. Greater the myths, and I too delight in them. Greater Adam and Eve, I too look back and accept them. Great the risen and fallen nations and their poets, women, sages, inventors, rulers, warriors, and priests. Great is liberty, great is equality, I am their follower. Helmsmen of nations, choose your craft. Where you sail, I sail. Yours is the muscle of life or death. Yours is the perfect science. In you, I have absolute faith. Great is today and beautiful. It is good to live in this age. There never was any better. Great are the plunges and throes and triumphs and falls of democracy. Great the reformers with their lapses and screams. Great the daring and venture of sailors on new explorations. Great are yourself and myself. We are just as good and bad as the oldest and youngest or any. What the best and worst did, we could do. What they felt, do we feel it in ourselves? What they wished, do we not wish the same? Great is youth and equally great is old age. Great are the day and night. Great is wealth and great is poverty. Great is expression and great is silence. Youth large, lusty, and loving. Youth full of grace and force and fascination. Do you know that old age may come after you with equal grace and force and fascination? Day full blown and splendid, day of the immense sun and action and ambition and laughter. The night follows close with millions of suns and sleep and restoring darkness. Wealth with the flush hand and fine clothes and hospitality, but then the soul's wealth, which is candor and knowledge and pride and enfolding love. Who goes for men and women showing poverty richer than wealth? Expression of speech and what is written or said, forget not that silence is also expressive. That anguish as hot as the hottest and contempt as cold as the coldest may be without words, that the true adoration is likewise without words and without kneeling. Great is the greatest nation, the nation of clusters of equal nations. Great is the earth and the way it became what it is. Do you imagine it is stopped at this and the increase abandoned? Understand then that it goes as far onward from this as this is from the times when it lay in covering waters and gases. Great is the quality of truth in man. The quality of truth in man supports itself through all changes. It is inevitably in the man. He and it are in love and never leave each other. The truth in man is no dictum. It is vital as eyesight. If there be any soul, there is truth. If there be man or woman, there is truth. If there be physical or moral, there is truth. If there be equilibrium or volition, there is truth. If there be things at all upon the earth, there is truth. O truth of the earth, O truth of things, I am determined to press the whole way toward you. Sound your voice. I scale mountains or dive in the sea after you. Great is language. It is the mightiest of sciences. It is the fullness and color and form and diversity of the earth and of men and women and of all qualities and processes. It is greater than wealth. It is greater than buildings or ships or religions or paintings or music. Great is the English speech. What speech is so great as the English? Great is the English brood. What brood has so vast a destiny as the English? It is the mother of the brood that must rule the earth with new rule. The new rule shall rule as the soul rules and as the love and justice and equality that are in the soul rule. Great is the law. Great are the old few landmarks of the law. They are the same in all times and shall not be disturbed. Greater marriage, commerce, newspapers, books, free trade, railroads, steamers, international mail, and telegraphs and exchanges. Great is justice. Justice is not settled by legislators and laws. It is in the soul. It cannot be varied by statutes any more than love or pride or the attraction of gravity can. It is immutable. It does not depend on majorities. Majorities are what not can't come at last before the same passionless and exact tribunal. For justice are the grand natural lawyers and perfect judges. It is in their souls. It is well assorted. They have not studied for nothing. The great includes the less. They rule on the highest grounds. They oversee all eras and states and administrations. The perfect judge fears nothing. He could go front to front before God. Before the perfect judge, all shall stand back. Life and death shall stand back. Heaven and hell shall stand back. Great is goodness. I do not know what it is any more than I know what health is, but I know it is great. Great is wickedness. I find I often admire it just as much as I admire goodness. Do you call that a paradox? It certainly is a paradox. The eternal equilibrium of things is great, and the eternal overthrow of things is great. And there is another paradox. Great is life, and real and mystical, wherever and whoever. Great is death. Sure as life holds all parts together, death holds all parts together. Sure as the stars return again after they merge in the light, death is great as life. Walt Whitman, 1855, original edition of The Leaves of Grass. Indeed, all of this, the entire reading of Walt Whitman's original Leaves of Grass, which he published on his own in 1855, is a profoundly broad, wide angle of life. And he uses the one great skill and craft that he honed himself, that he nurtured from the time he was a babe to the time that he was the man that he described, of the age of, I think he said 36, if I remember just off the top of my head. He was born in 1819. And when he wrote this in 1854, 1855, and published in 1855, he used the language of his heart, the language of his eyesight, the language of his mind, to compel himself forward and invite all of us to do the same. He is but just one journeyman among the many journeymen and journeywomen of this world that have come and gone, and we, like him, are in the same effort if we choose to be. In his words, great is language. It is the mightiest of the sciences. It is the fullness and color and form and diversity of the earth and of men and women and of all qualities and processes. It is greater than wealth. It is greater than buildings or ships or religions or paintings or music. It is the words. It is the wider angle that he offers to each one of us. I, for one, accept that offer. Now, to be completely candid here, I don't look at Walt Whitman as a God figure, but I do look at him a little bit like the way I look at the great character Gandalf that J.R.R. Tolkien created and brought to life in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, in that he is extremely wise, he remains ever present, and he has a sense of the cosmos and a sense of this wide, broad angle that's beyond comprehension. He's tapping into something that is an echo of a time that is endless, and it's forever, and it will continue to be that way. And when we get around the words of those that have an ability to speak in the written and in the verbal sense, the way Whitman does, it opens vistas in our mind, and it reminds us of our own deep well of peaceable, happy, and contented humanity, that it's in all of us to sort through these puzzles and these dimensions and these dire circumstances of our life if we will just tap into that wellspring of goodness, and it comes in the form of the language that he offers. Every existence, as he describes, has its idiom, which, if you think about the word idiom, it's just peculiar to itself. It's an artistic expression characteristic of an individual. You are an individual. I'm an individual. We as a nation in America are a collection of individuals. We as a body throughout the world are a collection of individuals. But what's important is that we remain individuals even as we integrate and share amongst and with ourselves, that we remain intact as the individual searching for that goodness, that humanity, that we share it with those to our left and to our right and to our front and to our back. Whoever he looks at in the Traveler's Coffee House, as he describes in Whitman's words, claims him. Whitman was claimed by the people that he saw. He sees in himself them and they in him. And I often find that I do the same thing. Long before I started reading Whitman, I recognized this trait. It's a little bit of a power of discernment. And I am not any special individual. I'm not even trying to say that. But I've always had a sense of other people. Now, I'm not perfect. There have been times when I have been so blind based on my own idiocy, my own ignorance, my own rage at moments, or my own misunderstanding and just caustic frustration that might come up, that I'm unable to see myself in the travelers at the coffee house, if I'm looking at this metaphor. But for the most part, I really am very much capable and able and do see those at the coffee house. And when I see them, I see not only them in me, but I see myself in them. And there's a very humbling quality that comes when that happens, because we recognize really how insignificant we are and yet how vitally important we are in the context of the other and not ourselves. I am immensely grateful for Walt Whitman, because as I've read him from the time I first picked up his words to the moment of now, I know I can continue to read him and I will still find things anew, and he will continue to be the great reminder in which I am able to strangely transmute myself upon his pages and beyond into the faces of the people that I see throughout the life that I'm going to continue to live. And I'm getting better at trying to pay attention, and not just trying, but actually paying attention and incorporating what I see in a way that makes me more human, makes me pause and listen a little bit more. And this is an effort that I will continue to work on throughout the expanse of however long I'm here. As I led into the preview before I read this, I think of the line, "If I should fall, remember what you see here." Remember what you see here. He invites us to do the same thing. But what are verses beyond the flowing character you could have, he asks us. He talks about the child, and in this sense, we are that child. They gave this child, that child's parents he's speaking of here, more of themselves than that. They gave him afterward every day. They and of them became part of him. The spread of purity it lies motionless in. Think about this: the horizon's edge, the flying sea crow, the fragrance of salt marsh and shore mud. These became part of that child who went forth every day and who now goes and will always go forth every day. And these become of him or her that peruses them now, in this small hour right now. This is beautiful. It's endless. It's forever. It's intimate, and it's linked. It remains, these words are as alive today as the moment he put them on the page, because he's using words to describe what is happening right now. It will continue to happen if we will but just choose to see, to articulate and walk. Think about that. To articulate and walk. To walk and to articulate. How often do we walk from point A to point B? Are we able to articulate what we pass, what we see, what we take note of? Have we stored up enough knowledge in the form of the words that we cultivate to say in our own minds and hearts what we might be able to say to a fellow passenger or traveler that could impart something of kindness and humanity that could change their day, change their vision, broaden their angle, and in so doing, broaden our own? It's a question I have to ask myself. And that my soul embraces you this hour, and we affect each other without ever seeing each other, and never perhaps to see each other, is every bit as wonderful. Those are Whitman's words, but I own them as well too, because I take part in that. And he says to us, and that I remind you, Uncle Walt, he is humanity's great reminder. It's interesting too, in this moment of evolving storms in America, for instance, these lines really stood out to me. Great are the plunges and throes and triumphs and falls of democracy. And further on, he says, sure as the stars return again after they merge in the light. This is an evolution of life. We are evolving. We are growing. And why do we have to be so right when we'd be much better off admitting we've all been so terribly wrong? That maybe what this is really all about is just seeing from a wider angle. That perspective, as we grow, a perspective that encourages courage and a wide angle with which to understand what that courage requires of you and of me, of us all. These are the thoughts that come at the very end of this as I read it. I'd like to conclude tonight's sixth portion of the reading of the Leaves of Grass with a little bit of history, and then a particular sequence out of a film based on this little moment of history. And I'll tie this together. So let me get a quick drink of water, and I'm going to walk you through this just very briefly. round about 1989, as I was a freshman maybe I was going into my sophomore year, I think. It might have been that time frame of high school. I picked up 2 books after seeing a film, which I'm going to tell you about here in just a second. The first book was written in 1973 by a writer of the name Lincoln Kirstein, or Kirstein, I believe is how it's pronounced. And that book is entitled Lay This Laurel. And the second book was written earlier than that in 1965 by Peter Burchard, and it's called One Gallant Rush. And both books tell of the story of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who was the regimental commander of the Union 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment at the time of the Civil War. He died at Fort Wagner, Charleston, South Carolina, at the age of 25 years on July 18, 1863, almost to this very day of the time that I'm giving this podcast. So I'm horrible with math because I was a literature major. You have to forgive me. I can't do quick math in my mind, but go ahead and do the math. 1863. So how long ago that was based on 2022 today. So horrible about that. But anyway, almost to the day he passed away at the Battle of Fort Wagner. And I want to set the stage here a little bit before I share a particular sequence from the 1989 film Glory that really, really had a huge impact on me when I went to go see it. Colonel Robert Gould Shaw came from a wealthy family, and by dint of his own pedigree, was able to get into the officer class early on in the Civil War, and was able to grow up into very quickly matriculate into a regimental command. And he had proven his mettle in battle, so he had earned his stripes, but he was also very, very young, and in many cases was dismissed as probably not having enough experience to take on a full command of the kind of regiment that he may have aspired to want to be. But under the leadership of Commander Quincy Adams Gilmore, he was given command of what was then the first all-black regiment in the Union Army, which was the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, which I just mentioned here. And at the time of 1863, the war was beginning to peak itself in the throes of the bloodiest portion of the war, and leading up to the very end that would ensue in the years to come. And the Union very much needed to take hold of Charleston, South Carolina, because of the land space there, but also just the strategic nature of putting an attack there to winnow out and bring down the Confederacy that had been built up and established itself, obviously, in its own land and territory at that time. And Colonel Shaw volunteered to take on what would be a very bloody and costly endeavor under General Gilmore, and that was to secure a foothold at Charleston Harbor. Now, just to give a little bit of perspective, I want to step back here just a minute before I give just the motion of what this was about. Fort Wagner was on the southern approach of the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, and a significant Confederate garrison had been stationed there. And these men were dug in. They'd been dug in for quite some time. They were very well armed, and they had a broad assortment of very heavy guns. And because of their particular situation in place, it was a very, very difficult place to take hold of, target, if you will. And so the Union at this point to attack this garrison, and they'd already attempted it once before and failed miserably, the Union brought in 2 full brigades. But the problem was that the approach into Fort Wagner was so narrow that the Union was forced to attack 1 regiment at a time. And so when General Gilmore put this assignment forth, and Colonel Shaw subsequently volunteered, because this was an assignment that nobody was going to take, but Colonel Shaw, knowing that this could be his moment, and not out of some vainglorious attempt, he had trained his men, they had worked tirelessly, but he knew that this was probably the moment that he and his men, this black regiment, were going to have the opportunity to show their resolve and their bravery. And this was a really risky thing to do, but when he stepped forward, General Gilmore was all too pleased to give him that opportunity. because it was really going to be that point of the spear to get this thing moving and hopefully give the Union the opportunity to take advantage and, with that point of the spear, take over Fort Wagner. But the casualties were going to be very, very high. As the gathering Union regiment or brigades gathered on the beach before this narrow inlet where this takes place, they cheered as Colonel Robert Gould Shaw led his 54th Regiment forward to this inlet, this little opening that was going to be the point upon which they were going to go across this open beach up against the wall of the fort to try to take that. And those that were observing, they cheered, but it was not a cheer out of a lighthearted cheer. It was a cheer of courage. They knew what these men were up against and the sacrifice they were about to make. And as the campaign commenced, it took place at the dusk of July 18th, 1863. The 54th charged, and Shaw led that charge at the very front of his regiment. And as he stepped forward and they commenced this charge, he yelled, "Forward, 54th, forward!" And they went into the fray to take the Confederate batteries. The 54th crossed the moat, and then they scaled this muddy hill of the outer wall. And at that point, we're basically hunched down because it was full night and the 54th was facing heavy, heavy fire from above and at the perimeter. And as a result of that, and they'd already taken very heavy casualties on the approach up there because of the cannon fire that was going on. It was very bloody. And these men persisted to at least get to that wall, but they hesitated at that point. And in that very instant, and this is very early in the battle, I don't know what the time would have been, but based on my reading of the occasion, probably around 6 p.m. at that point, maybe 6:30, getting on to 7 p.m., Colonel Shaw mounted a parapet and urged his men forward, but he was shot through the chest 3 times and died right there on that wall. The men at that point rose up in response, and the fighting continued until 10 p.m. Of course, other regiments would follow. The 54th was that point of the spear. But by 10 p.m., the Union forces had suffered such heavy losses. The 54th, of course, suffering the absolute worst of those losses, the Union had to withdraw. Shaw was buried in a mass grave with his men, these black soldiers, the first of the black regimental infantry that had ever been formed in the Union Army. And as was custom at the time, and as part as history will record, a big part of what this war was about was the emancipation of the slaves and equal rights for those that had been enslaved. And as was custom, a regimental officer or a commander, a colonel, certainly a commander, in a field of battle would be removed from that battle and buried at a different location, most likely in a heralded place or back home. But Shaw was buried in a mass grave with his men, and he remained there. And his father, Frank, said this of that, and this was their wishes as well. There were some that said, well, why wasn't his body removed? Later in history, I believe his body was removed, and I think that whole area actually has been transformed. There is a marker for them. I think it's in Beaufort, South Carolina, and you'll have to forgive me. I haven't done intensive research. This is all reading that I'm remembering back when I was in high school, so I'm kind of calling this to mind just very briefly off the top of my head. I did check a few things on Google, but at the time, and for a very long portion of time, he remained interred with his men, and he might still be in that particular location. I can't say for sure, but Shaw's father, Frank, later said of his being laid to rest with his men is that we would not have his body removed from where it lies, surrounded by his brave and devoted soldiers. We can imagine no holier place than that in which he lies among his brave and devoted followers, nor wish him better company. What a bodyguard he has. I share this little bit of history for what is leading up to this particular scene that I want to mention. James Horner did the music for the movie Glory. The film was directed by Edward Zwick in 1989. I don't need to get into all the detail, but if you've seen it, it stars Matthew Broderick, Denzel Washington, Cary Elwes, and Morgan Freeman. It, to this day, remains one of my most favorite films, certainly of the Civil War era. It tells a remarkable story, and James Horner's music is just soaring. And the Boys Choir of Harlem sings along with the musical masterpiece soundtrack that he developed. And the film is based on these books that I'd mentioned earlier, Lay This Laurel and One Gallant Rush, which I read and had a huge impact on me. At the time of my reading these, what's interesting is this was a time when I was also becoming more aware of Walt Whitman. I was aware that Walt Whitman and I, as I mentioned before, shared a birthday. And because I already had a real proclivity and predisposition to literature and reading, I was just naturally picking up things that he'd written, and certainly Leaves of Grass, because I liked the way the language made me feel. And so there's a bit of a moment of blending here where the experience of this story of Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, seeing the film, reading the books that I've talked about, and then having Whitman come in, I feel as if it's kind of one of those moments that emphasized and further grounded the relationship that I continue to have with Whitman. And I'm not trying to say they're not tied to each other, and yet they are. So much of what I experience in my life, these impressions, they come with the kinds of things and the influences that I'm taking in at particular moments. And as I've talked about this wider angle and the flowing character of things that I'm taking in, this helped adapt some of my own thinking. And I want to focus on just very briefly a wide angle of flowing character that comes in a sequence at the very end of the film, at the beginning of the approach that I just described of Robert Gould Shaw as he is going to lead his regiment forward. The scene begins with Colonel Shaw, who's played by Matthew Broderick, riding up to a horse, and at the side of this narrow opening in front of the Fort Wagner, which is already, there are shells going off in the distance, Colonel Shaw approaches what would be the press, the gathered writers that are observing what this battle is going to be, so they can record it for the various newspapers and history as well. And he has in his hand a series or a bunch of letters, and he hands this to one of the gentlemen writers at the beach. And he says to the man, he says, "If I should fall, remember what you see here." And he hands him those letters. And at that point, Colonel Shaw rides his horse down to the beach. His regiment is gathered. They have walked through the two brigades that I had mentioned and the cheering of the Union soldiers, knowing the slaughter that is about to take place and the courage that is about to be demonstrated by this 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. And Colonel Shaw rides his horse to the edge of the water there in Charleston, which faces the Atlantic Ocean. And the waves are coming in, these undulating waves. It's not like tempestuous, but they're in the rolling waves of the beach. And as he looks out over that water one last time, you see in the camera angle the consideration point, the wide angle that Colonel Shaw, at the age of 25, must have taken in. Now, I know this is a Hollywood movie, and it's based on history, which is real. No one knows for sure whether or not that particular sequence happened. But things like that, I believe, are true because they have to be in the sense of what great men and women face in these moments when they know it's right there at the end. And he's looking out over the water, and I can only imagine what he must be considering. A 25-year-old man about to lead a regiment to what will certainly be his death. And if not, it will be a miracle if he survives. The courage, the resolve, the wide angle that he demonstrates. And then he gets up. And actually, I should say this, before he climbs down from his horse, a V shape of seagulls, the sea crows. And I'm going to use a line from Whitman here: the horizon's edge, the flying sea crow, the fragrance of salt marsh and shore mud. These became part of that child who went forth every day and who now goes and will always go forth every day. And these become of him or her that peruses them now. He sees these seagulls or these sea crows flying in a V shape just over the water in this elegant symmetry. And then they break up and they lift up into the air and out over. And it's at that point that Colonel Shaw, with that look of a deep, introspective and broad wide angle perspective all at once, steps down from his horse and walks to the back of the regiment and comes up all the way from back to front through the middle of his men. And as he walks through, they shout, "Shaw, huzzah, huzzah." It's powerful because in the moment, the wide angle that he took in was enough to carry him and his men forward to face whatever was to come without knowing what was to come. And that's great courage. I don't know what the message of Walt Whitman may be for you. I know now today more of what the message of Walt Whitman is for me, but it will always continue to evolve. And like anything written with great power, anything spoken with great spirit and strength and truth, we, each of us, are reminded to take a broad view, to have courage, to maybe be less right and more willing to be understanding of the fact that we may not have the answer. We don't know, but we're here now. And what we take in matters. Everything is there for us to perceive if we're willing to see it. And I think that's the message for us right now. And it's the message for me. And it's a big reason why I decided to read the original 1855 Leaves of Grass. And so here tonight, I will conclude. The reading has come to a finish, but I have one further podcast, and I think it will be a very refreshing insight. It's going to be a little different, and it's going to take into account some of the breadcrumbs that I've been putting upon the water as we've been going through this together. And that will be released in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to take a little time with this. So stay tuned. But in the interim, if you can, do yourself a favor and pick up a copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And every now and then, just get it out and read the language and see what it does to help you be more aware, to take that broader angle. And just remember also that what we're here doing today, if anything, for ourselves, is to develop that flowing character, because it has impact on those around us, and it can carry forward forever and ever, regardless of how short and how insignificant our time here may actually feel like. It does matter. I really appreciate you listening. I am Russell Cordell Staker, and this is the Small Hours Podcast. Have a wonderful evening. I'll be talking to you real soon. Good night. Thank you for being with me here in these small hours.